Who's having their horizons broadened? Yeah, that's a better question.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And we're going to finish this night actually talking about BCI and VR. So that's really exciting. But let's dive into decentralization with you. So Dieter, you are a legend actually. You created CryptoKitties, and as a creative people, I think I loved CryptoKitties, and it opened like a lot of horizons. So I think my first question would be tied to assets, actually. So let's talk about those assets ownership in XR. And so my question is like, you created one of the main standards of the NFTs, right? And back in that time, we were all thinking that with those NFTs, we had an avenue of like possibilities of ownership in the gaming field, right? However, there have been many debates about how asset ownership is handled with Solidity and Ethereum environment. And to address these issues, you introduced the concept of true ownership on Flow. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. Happy to give a little context to that question. So, of course, we built CryptoKitties in the end of 2017, and as part of that, I wrote up ERC 721, which introduced the standard for NFTs in the Ethereum community. And as we started building CryptoKitties, one of the things that really surprised me about Ethereum is that your assets aren't in your account. Conceptually, right, you own those things. But in terms of how the data structures work inside the blockchain, the CryptoKitties or USDC or any of your tokens, they actually live inside the smart contracts that they're defined in, and then they reference back to you as a user and say, I am, CryptoKitty number 72 is owned by Aleksandra. And so when we were building the Flow blockchain, which we built because, of course, famously CryptoKitties exceeded the capacity of Ethereum and made it mostly useless for a couple of weeks. And we were looking at a technology that we could use to support larger scale blockchain style applications. We started building Flow, and as a part of the creation of Flow, we looked into some research that came out of Carnegie Mellon and a couple other academic institutions that were looking at using structures within programming languages, allowing programming languages to define structures that would directly represent ownership in code. And so this really ignited our imagination. And so Flow actually has its own programming language called Cadence that is based on this idea of what we now call resource-oriented programming, where the language lets you define, as a programmer, define data structures, and those data structures can be owned by users, but those data structures can also be owned by other data structures. And so when you own an NFT or a fungible token on Flow, those things actually live in your account. And if you were to go and query the blockchain and say, what is in my account, you would see all your assets listed there. And this has some important but subtle important but subtle distinction in the sense that because your assets live in your account, the level of control that the smart contract has over how you dispose of them is reduced. And so as the creator of the asset, as the issuer of a particular NFT, I get to decide the rules of how that asset works, but I don't get to decide the rules of how that asset moves. And to me, that's super important, and that's where this term true ownership comes from. We're trying to wrap up that idea that in Cadence, you can define a data structure that you really do own because you can move it wherever you want. You can store it in different places inside your account. You can move it between accounts. And because it's a language construct, that ownership is managed. The ownership relationship is managed by the language, there's nothing that a smart contract can do to undermine that.
And so what are the current obstacles actually to this mass adoption of the gaming in extended reality and VR when it comes to talk about decentralization and decentralized architecture? And how do you actually address this issue? How do you see mass adoption?
Yeah, I think right now I feel like the primitives are there, right? Like we have the base building blocks. I guess the analogy I would use is it's sort of like the internet in the 90s, where it existed. You could send packets of data from one computer to another, and we had a bunch of protocols built on top of that. But it wasn't until the web browser came out that sort of normal folks were able to start to interact with it and see the value of it. And it's I don't know, it's really funny. Like I was in college when NCS Mosaic, the very first web browser, was released, and I remember thinking, I don't need this. It's not doing anything that I can't already do with the internet. And what my youthful mind didn't appreciate is that it wasn't about doing anything different. It was about making what the internet could already do accessible to a much larger number of people. And I think that's where we're at right now with blockchain technology, in that the building blocks are there. We've got all sorts of powerful primitives, but how do we present that to people in a way that's meaningful to them, useful and interesting to them? And how do we make that fit into their lives instead of asking them to, go through a bunch of obstacles to sort of come into our world?
Yeah, that's exactly true. And so that brings me to user experience. So what are for you the main obstacles, and how actually you are aiming to cope with those obstacles? Especially in gaming, actually. Decentralized gaming is a kind of a nightmare right now in terms of user experience. So yeah, do you have any ideas, any views on that?
Yeah, I mean, the hard part is, or rather the stumbling block has always been the key management. And so when you think about playing games, most of us, when we think about playing games, we think about our phone. Most of us, when we think about using Web3, we think about using a laptop web browser. And so the idea that the games will be in the web browser doesn't make much sense, but the idea that Web3 will be in your phone is something that we haven't entirely figured out. And in particular, if I go to the App Store and I download a game, how does that game access the blockchain in a secure way where the game developer doesn't have access to all of my assets? Don't think this is the place for in detail tech talk, but that's something we thought about a lot when we were building Flow, is how can we set up our account structure? How can we set up the way the blockchain even thinks about security such that it will make sense for mobile applications? And so, it turns out that through a combination of account abstraction, which people in the Ethereum community may have heard of, but also the ability to support the standard encryption that everybody's secure enclave already understands, you can actually build an application where you can go to the App Store, you can download it, and you can start playing it. It can actually be doing things on the blockchain on your behalf. Any in-game assets that you earn through playing, any currencies that you either earn or purchase, that can be represented on the blockchain. And then when you want to trade that or move that or interact with other experiences using those assets, then you can connect that existing account to the account where you control the key normally. And those accounts then just merge together. And you're not moving the assets, you're actually controlling that account. And so it gives people, I'm already feel myself going too deep down the technical rabbit hole. But to go back to your question, it really is about going to people where they are. And I think mobile is a big part of that. And I think giving people a chance to experience the value of these applications before they have to deal with the complexity of key management and the security issues with that, we have to flip that, right? Because today we always ask people, set up your keys, write down your 12 words, now you can play Web3. No. Come play Web3, Then when you understand the value of what you've created, now we ask you to secure it more carefully.
Yeah, I saw this crazy video of gaming actually, where like every second, whenever you wanted to use an asset, you needed like to open your wallet, validate your transaction, and then use this asset. So it was crazy because like you are meant to actually play, but then in reality, now with what we have in terms of technology, we are just like stuck in a UX nightmare actually of like validating transaction all the time. So yeah.
Yeah, and to run the risk of getting overly technical again, another feature that we built into the Cadence language was something we call capabilities, which is the ability to delegate control to another actor. So whether that's a game saying to a game, hey, you can use these NFTs in the game, but not those NFTs, right? Or more correctly, you specify which ones they can have access to, and the rest they don't even they can't even see them. And again, the technical details are to me fascinating, and maybe you can pull me aside if you're interested after this. But the critical point is that in the world of blockchains and when you're developing smart contracts, managing ownership and managing access control are two of the most important things. And by building programming constructs, building those ideas into the language itself, we give a ton more flexibility to developers, and actually we increase security for users. It's really exciting.
Amazing. And so in XR and Metaverse, we can have like very heavy assets actually. So could you explain how you envision solving the problem of like storing those heavy XR and Metaverse assets?
Yeah, I think that data storage in blockchains is a really it's a tricky topic, and there's sort of, I think as humans, especially in the modern world where local storage on our phones, on our laptops is relatively cheap. We tend to think of data like, the cost of data as being, photos, movies, and things like that. And on a blockchain, we're actually at a much tighter level where because we're all sharing the same computer, right? Like functionally, it's one big computer that we're all using together. There's no room for our photos. There's no room for our videos on there. Even just all of the data that we might want to process, right? The information about when that NFT was created, the information about the stats on that particular game piece, that is even a challenge of how we store all that. And so, I think things like IPFS and Filecoin, obviously we had one up here earlier, and I'm a really strong believer in that technology as a way of distributing and finding data in wherever it might be, and not having to worry about the storage of that, the sort of presentation data like images and video. But even just scaling a blockchain, it's a really big challenge. And so that's one of the things, again, in Flow that we've had to put a lot of effort into is how do you get to the point where you can have, let's say, a petabyte of data, and that smart contracts can act on that data when they need to, without it becoming unreasonably expensive for people to store new data.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Last question. What do you think? Like, we are all here. I think we have some hackers, builders. So from your point of view, what do we need actually to build this field and make the extended reality a reality actually?
Well, I think the good news is, going back to my point earlier about how I think a lot of this technology is ready and it just needs to be, we have to figure out the right use cases for it. I think the good news is that we need humans with creativity. We need people who have great ideas, are willing to forge new paths and create new use cases, because eventually someone's going to come up with something like the web browser that is going to break open a new way of using this technology. And I think it's going to be a moment when the rest of the world finally wakes up to the power of what we have, and how that, and obviously I'm talking about blockchains and Web3 here, but that to me, that is such a perfect partner to XR, because if I want to live in a virtual world, I don't want it controlled by corporations. I want it to be autonomous. I want it to have its own set of rules that is enforced by that decentralized system rather than some government or corporate entity controlling it. So I think we're really close, and it's mostly just gated by people dreaming the right dreams, and I think a lot of the technology is already there.
Amazing and exciting. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks so much.